Leave Australia before 2026 and before it's too late. Very recently, I received an email from one of my clients who expressed serious concerns about the political situation in Australia. Today we're going to analyze some of the biggest challenges Australia faces in 2025 and offer solutions to some of the unanswered questions you might have. I'm going to read this email to you now. My client says the following about the current cost of living crisis in Australia. He says, I would say the biggest challenge in Australia right now is, without question, the cost of living. It's gone through the roof in recent years. Everyday Australians are really feeling the pinch, whether it's groceries, fuel, rent, mortgages. It's all just getting harder to manage. He goes on, I've got friends back home who are working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. If you had a look at the recent inflation statistics in Australia, you pretty much can see that since the past crisis, inflation has skyrocketed in Australia, making their lives extremely difficult for middle-class Australians. He makes a very important point here. Let me read this to you. He says, and it's not just the cost of things. It's the overall pressure of living in a system that's becoming increasingly unsustainable for the average person. Now, what we're doing here, because most of you guys watching this video, you guys are middle class. The middle class is the vast majority of people watching this video, and it's the vast majority of people who are going to be affected by anything, no matter whether that's in Australia, United Kingdom, the United States of America, or Canada. My client says there's been massive population growth, both through immigration and internal factors, and that's placed a huge burden on housing, healthcare, infrastructure, you name it. The dream of owning a home in Australia has become just that for many people, a dream. Prices are out of reach, and even renting is becoming unaffordable in many parts of the country. It is true that Australia, specifically Sydney and Melbourne, are home to the most expensive real estate in the entire world. Many Australians have been priced out of the real estate market. They can't afford to buy, neither rent a home in their own country in 2025, leaving them with no other option but to leave the island altogether. Let's hear what he's got to say about the government in Australia. He says, and then there's the government side of things. Australia has always been a bit of a nanny state, but over the last few years, that's really intensified. There's a rule or a regulation for everything. I mean, it's like you can't even make simple decisions without some form of government interference. That's becoming increasingly more apparent since the end of the past disaster, the past crisis. Government interference, not only in Australia, but in many developed countries, has reached new extreme levels, shocking people that were once able to live under a more relaxed, democratic government. While rule of law is strongly present throughout Australia, freedom of speech is in decline on the island. He goes on, he says, the amount of bureaucracy is staggering and it's exhausting. And when you combine that with some of the world's highest tax burdens, you start to question what you're really getting in return. At some point, Australia was home to a functioning system that allowed citizens of Australia to have access to some of the best and most affordable healthcare in the entire world. But that is changing. Needless to say, the cost of living is one of the biggest concerns middle-class Australians have. My client says, look, I remember growing up in Australia when it felt more free, more balanced. Sure, taxes were always a thing, but at least you felt like you got something in return. Decent healthcare, good schools, and ability to build a life. But now the quality of public services is declining and the red tape just keeps tightening. If governments could do just one thing, reduce bureaucracy, and remove red tape altogether, or the majority of it, everyday citizens, including middle-class Australians, could finally start living the dream again. But it's not happening in 2025. He makes a very heartfelt point about loving his own country, and we've heard similar things from other people that we have interviewed on our channel. He says, it's not that I stopped loving my country. It's just that Australia changed, and I no longer felt like it was changing in a direction that worked for me. I know a lot of Aussies feel the same. They are tired, they are overregulated, and they are ready for something simpler, freer, and more sustainable. He says, and that's what led me to leave Australia before 2026. If you are a subscriber or client of Nomad Elite, you've probably heard me preach about the cost of living being one of the biggest issues surrounding the quality of life in the Western Hemisphere, and how the increase in food prices, utilities, rent, and many other issues have really made it difficult to enjoy life in this very century. And all of this leads to you wanting to leave your native country more than ever before. It leads to you wanting to leave the place you used to call home. It's quite saddening. Now we're going to hit a very important, very sensitive topic, and that is immigration and what my client has to say about the current immigration situation in Australia. He says, Australia is a country I was born in and grew up in. It's also a country of immigrants, from the First Nations to the waves of Europeans post-World War II, to more recent arrivals from Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. We've always had a multicultural story, and for most of my life I believed we'd struck a pretty good balance. Now you see, he has a positive outlook on the immigration policies of Australia, or should I say Australia's past immigration policies. But he's got some doubts. He goes on here, he says, but what I've noticed in the last decade, and especially leading up to 2026, is that something changed. It wasn't just about welcoming people anymore, it was about scale, pace, and integration. Or more honestly, the lack of it. We have seen record-breaking immigration numbers in recent years, and I think what's being missed in the national conversation is whether the infrastructural, cultural cohesion and economic system can actually keep up. From what I saw, they are not. It's not just about housing anymore, though. That's a huge part of it. It's also about schools being overcrowded, hospitals being understaffed, public transport being unreliable, and a sense that everyday life is starting to break under the pressure. You see, he had a positive expectation of Australia's government and how they managed things in the past, but now, given the results Australia generated over the past number of years, he isn't that positive anymore. He lived in Sydney, and he has to say the following about the situation there. He says, I lived in Sydney for most of my adult life. A global city, sure, but increasingly one that feels like it's losing its sense of identity. You walk through certain suburbs now, and it's like a patchwork of isolated communities rather than a shared Australian culture. Now, I want to make a very important point here. A lot of countries, including Australia, the United States of America, and Canada, were built by immigrants. These are immigrant countries. I mean, look at Canada, right? I mean, the first settlers, that built Canada into the great country it once was. And the same is also true for the people who arrived in Australia. Even if it was prison island before, lots of people arrived in Australia with the best of intentions of making it one of the best, most successful countries ever. And guess what? They achieved exactly that. He goes on, he says, and it's not even about race or background, it's about whether people even want to be part of a larger whole or just stick to their own enclaves, their own languages, their own systems. Now, he wants immigration, and he wants people to integrate, right? He wants people to assimilate. He wants people to become part of the Australian culture. He's a very loving person. Now let's hear what he has got to say about growing up. He says, growing up, we had mates from Greece, Italy, Vietnam. People became Australian proudly. They worked hard, learned English, joined the foodie club, sent their kids to public schools, and contributed to the same story. Now, this is what immigration is all about, or should be all about. Immigration's all about adding value to the country you immigrate to. That's the beginning, the middle, and the end of immigration. That's a textbook definition. He says, now I see more and more people arriving with no real interest in that story and no system in place pushing them toward it either. What concerns me is that we are creating parallel societies and no one's brave enough to talk about it without getting labeled. That's one of the biggest issues we're seeing. Anyone who does have the courage to speak up, and a lot of the times talk the truth, share the truth, address the truth, gets punished, gets penalized. And a lot of the times people feel ashamed about speaking up and talking about the core issues that we must resolve to create and sustain a successful society in the 21st century. The client goes on, he says there's a kind of cultural fragility happening where questioning anything is treated as offensive or xenophobic, even when it's coming from a place of concern. And on top of that, the government seems more focused on appeasing international narratives than looking after its own people. Housing unaffordability is now generational. That is so true. We're living throughout generations, generation through generation, where people cannot afford to own a home anymore. In fact, people can't even afford to rent their own space anymore. So what do people end up doing? People end up sharing a flat with people they don't know. It's the only way to stay alive, but not to thrive. Many Aussies, young families, single-income households feel locked out of the dream we were sold growing up. Meanwhile, we're expected to carry the tax burden, the social cost, and the cultural shift without ever being asked if we are okay with it. He goes on, so for me it all started adding up. The high taxes, the bureaucracy, the constant regulation, the vanishing sense of national identity, and the feeling that if you are a hardworking, traditional, middle-class Aussie, you're somehow less of a priority in your own country. Isn't that how we all feel these days, especially in 2025? Don't we all feel like unappreciated? Don't we all feel like people don't want us anymore? We don't even feel welcomed in our own countries, in our own native countries anymore. And he goes on here, he says, that's why I started looking elsewhere. I didn't leave because I hated Australia. I left because it no longer felt like the country I grew up in. And I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. Here, I'm not subjected to the micromanagement of multiple government agencies, dictating every aspect of personal life, from child rearing to daily activities. Now, this is true. Paraguay is home to a much smaller government. What does it mean living under a smaller government? Well, it means lower taxes. And in Paraguay's case, it actually means no tax on foreign-sourced income at all. Plus, there's just less bureaucracy, less red tape, and less regulation surrounding life in Paraguay. He says there remains a strong culture of individual responsibility and simplicity. Now, isn't that how it should be? Do we really need or want the government to be controlling our day-to-day activities like it is happening in the Western Hemisphere? Wouldn't we rather want to be responsible for our own actions? That's how it should be. The less the government interferes in our personal lives and the less bureaucracy we have to comply with on a daily basis, the higher our quality of life will be. And the less in taxes we end up paying. He says, and the people, while they may not measure wealth by Western standards, their sincerity is deeply refreshing. Now, I agree with this. I mean, there is a lot going on in Paraguayan culture that people from the developed world could agree with. He says it feels real. So no, I do not view this re-evaluation of life's fundamentals as unreasonable. On the contrary, it feels like a collective awakening, subtle but steadily intensifying. He says that is precisely why I am here, why I am choosing to establish roots in Paraguay. It simply aligns with where I am now and where I want to be moving forward. It is an undeniable fact that Australia is currently undergoing extreme political turmoil, a cultural shift that doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon, leaving Australians with no other options but to depart their native country for good. If you're interested in minimizing your taxes, becoming a resident of a territorial tax country, achieving a higher quality of life while cutting down on your living costs, and mingling with like-minded individuals that aspire the same things, go to Nomad Elite and book a consultation with me. I look forward to helping you relocate to South America. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate your attendance, and I look forward to welcoming you to the next video.